16 personalities as leaders, INFJs. In a previous video in this series, I mentioned that some of the leaders referenced for the various types would be what you'd call evil. Well, that time has come. This is a series about examples of types in leadership positions who overcome the weaknesses associated with that type, and not necessarily a judgment about whether they were good people or had good effects on the world overall. Gandhi. INFJs have SE as their inferior function. SE is very much an action-oriented function, one that wants to go into battle and relish the heat of the moment. It's an energetic function in many ways. SE DOMs, so ESFPs and ESTPs, can even afford to be frivolous with their energy because of its excess and abundance. INFJs, on the other hand, are energy conservers by nature, both social energy and energy in general. They will rarely be in your face, aggressive, or domineering. Gandhi was a deceptively clever strategist whose frail, even saintly appearance constantly misled his adversaries into underestimating him. Gandhi was an astonishing exponent of gentle, subtle, and even passive power. He represents a certain INFJ archetype. Instead of relying on forcefulness, they instead rely on force of will. Instead of exerting force, they resist external force from others, and somehow reverse that energy back at them. Gandhi invented a kind of passive-resistant form of protest. I'm going to mention a story of when Gandhi protested against the British salt tax, which had a brutal economic effect on the poorest people in India. Gandhi intended to lead a march of his followers from present-day Mumbai to the coastal town of Dundee. When he got there, he would gather sea salt left on the shore by the waves and encourage Indians everywhere to do the same, which would have been illegal. All of this could be prevented, as he'd written to the British officers in charge, if the tax was removed. The British officer he wrote to imagined the 60-year-old Gandhi, frail and fragile, leaning on his bamboo stick, walking with a relatively small group, 80 people, on a 200-mile trek to the sea, where he'd gather some sea salt. Compared to what the British were expecting or fearing, this was nothing, hardly a threat. In fact, it seemed kind of comical and stupid, not just to them, but also to some supporters of Gandhi. This did, however, put the British in a position where they couldn't exactly arrest an old man for going on a long walk. So, they let him do it, assuming it might make him look foolish, discredit him partially, and therefore put a dent in the momentum of Indian independence. Gandhi, as is characteristic of certain INFJ archetypes, is an exponent of power without force. He drew people to him using initially small acts that snowballed into grand, symbolic gestures. Gandhi framed the march as almost religious in quality and bathed in holy symbolism, making it akin to Buddha's march to attain divine wisdom. With each day that passed on the march, he gained more and more followers. The national press were invited, by him, to capture it and immortalize it, as if it were some historical event in the making. By the time the British had realized the sheer power and impact the march was having, it was too late. They had been outplayed. Because of his genuinely gentle and supremely subtle approach, the British underestimated him, and simply didn't see him or his methods as a threat. At times, he would have looked like a comical figure to them, someone who was an annoyance to keep an eye on, but not someone hugely dangerous or disruptive. In reality, he was an uncompromising and relentless person, in possession of an iron will. Gandhi is an exceptional example of an INFJ who, through gentle, subtle, passive, and symbolic power, manages to conjure up immense energy, presence, and force, compensating for a typical INFJ weakness. Hitler. I've seen Hitler typed as INTJ, ENTJ, and even ENFJ at various points, but I do think that INFJ is the best fit for him. INFJs have TE as a blind spot function, so it's something they don't use much, don't value, and in some ways disregard and neglect. TE is a highly organizational function. It can take a group of tasks and figure out which order to do them in that gets them done in the quickest way. If you're in a rush and have loads to do, a high TE user is going to be your best bet. So, when it comes to the strategies of war, high TE users are likely to excel, being able to outmaneuver their enemies, to manage logistics brilliantly, and strike with efficient and effective decisiveness. You might think that, if nothing else, surely Hitler was an exceptional organizational mind. After all, he nearly achieved world domination, which is going to be hard to do without that aptitude. Well, not necessarily. Hitler's style of leadership was to delegate. His inner circle was full of people with varied and exceptional skill sets. People who were dangerously powerful with propaganda, messaging, crafting ideologies, managing the army, strategizing, planning campaigns, and so on. Hitler's approach was to deeply understand the psychology of those people around him and to weaponize that understanding, playing people against each other, knowing their points of insecurity, playing favorites, knowing that the person who had just fallen out of favor would desperately try to return to his good graces, so would go above and beyond for him. He was an astonishing psychological manipulator. Yes, he was a strategist and a planner, but it mainly showed up through his understanding of human psychology and how to bend it in deeply dark and unpleasant ways. Hitler found a way to outsource the TE aspects of his campaigns. He did this by managing the people who were managing the war. That way, he could compensate for a weakness by using his strengths. There are quite a few examples of when he steps in and personally makes strategic decisions and they go wrong. His forte was in the realm of ideas and psychology, and not in the realm of TE or painting. So in these two examples, you have Gandhi, who became hugely powerful and forceful, whilst still retaining that gentleness, subtleness, and even passivity that INFJs often have. By surrounding himself and his actions in so much symbolism and weight, even really small actions became huge, not because of what they were, but because of what they represented in people's minds. Hitler was able to pull off huge organizational tasks by managing the people who were managing them. By focusing on psychology, he was able to make people conduits to his will. So far, there are 2 other episodes in this series, one on INTPs and one on ISTJs. Feel free to check them both out.